Hello and welcome to World of Curiosities and tonight's feature, Zeea and Pat's Witchy Wisdom. Zeea, what's on the docket tonight?
All right, we're going to be talking about familiars, what they were known as back in the day, what we talk about familiars now, what they are, and we're going to talk about our animal companions and how they can help us in magic, and we're going to talk about shapeshifters too.
Well, that sounds like an interesting lineup. So let's start with familiars. What you got?
Back in the Salem witch trial times, they said there was these beings called familiars that would help witches with their evil deeds and witchcrafts and um so what else do I want to say? But yeah, I want you to, since that's kind of your area of expertise, I want you to talk a little bit about the witch trials and the familiars and what they did or were said to have done.
It's really interesting. 1692, Salem witchcraft trials. You would have thought there would have been much more mention of cats, but there were not. There were actually very little mention of cats, and no cats were harmed, at least that we know, during the trials. However, there were two dogs. One dog, bless his little heart, was accused of bewitching a girl, and he was put to death. We could say he had a trial, but it wasn't a trial like we would imagine. It was certainly, men that would sit around and determine the fate of this animal, and that's exactly what happened. And then there was another man who was actually accused of witchcraft, and his witchcraft was that he was using a dog, and by magic, this dog was being sent to harm others. And so this poor dog, by association with this man, they had their little group meeting, and they decided that the animal should be put down, and that's exactly what happened. So during the Salem witchcraft trials, it was dogs. But if we regress back into European times, it's shocking to know that witches would often have their familiars killed along with them. And if you were unlucky enough to be part of what we called the burning times, when they would drag you out of your house, summarily say that you were a witch, and summarily execute you, like 1, 2, 3, your cat would often be killed, or something else that they thought was a familiar. And a familiar, according to Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and she was just a wonderful author. She wrote the Dictionary of Witches and Witchcraft, and in that book she says that a familiar was considered like a gift from the devil to the witch, and he was a low-level spirit, not spirit, but demon, negative energy, whatever we want to call this being. And this was given to the witch by the devil, and this familiar would do her bidding, whatever that might be. And so they didn't look at these animals as a cat or a dog. They would look at these animals as subordinate to Satan, and that they too were demons. So, it was with great relish that they not only dispatched the person that was claimed to be a witch, but also their dog or cat. Now, during the Black Plague, as we know, the Black Plague, you would have a situation where the plague was carried by rats and mice, and in the form of fleas. The fleas would carry the Black Plague. And so it was noticed that some women who happened to have cats their household did not get the plague. Well, it was because these cats were keeping the mice and the rats away. And so they were untouched. Unfortunately, that brought negative attention, if you will, and there was more than one woman who was drug out along with her cat or her dog and put to death. And there were cases where cats were burned alive and dogs were burned alive. So there's a deep relationship between the idea of the witch and her familiar. And it's really interesting because one of the things that's said is you never select your familiar. Now, let's forego this idea of Satan, attached to the familiar. As we know now, animals are sentient beings. They have a spirit. But a familiar is simply an animal. This is the true definition, and this is so. Come at me if you want. I do not care. but, but, but it's simply an animal that is psychically attracted to you. There's a connection there on the spirit level. And this animal provides you with love and care and attention just like you do it, just like any person does with any pet, right? Only it seems to be deeper, almost on a deeper level, because it is on that spiritual level also. Not to negate anyone's love for their pet. I'm just saying that it may be a little bit different for some witches. It's an energy that you carry with you forever. It is, and that you seek out. But again, the thought is that witches do not select the animal selects you. And it doesn't have to be a dog or a cat. It can be a bird. I know that Sybil Leek, she's the one that came out of the closet first. That's right. She had a jackdaw. That's right, that she would actually carry on her shoulder, and it was constantly with her. So it can be any animal.
That term, when you said a red jackdaw, I didn't know that was a type of corvid. Like, what is it, like a crow?
It was actually a black jackdaw. Yeah. I'm sorry if I said red. Black jackdaw.
I didn't know what they look like, is what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm. But Did you look her up? She's a fascinating character.
Well, I was just reading the Witches Compendium by Judica. I think that's how you say it, Judica Isles, and she had mentioned just like it's a compendium of witches, and she talks about familiars and different magical animals and stuff. But I was going to say, like, whenever you brought up when you were talking about the familiars, where does that information come from? Is it like from the witch's hammer that
the Malleus Maleficarum?
Yeah.
I should have read a English version, Malleus Maleficarum, but I may be mispronouncing that, but it does mean hammer of witches. Yes, hammer of witches. So I'm not sure if there's a connection with that, but one of the things that they did talk about was finding the witch's mark. There was always a mark, because you're marked by the devil, right? Supposedly, this is the wild imagination of men in the past, and women, say. And so they would look for that mark, and it was degrading to women. I mean, imagine the Puritan ethic back then. And they would disrobe you in front, if you were in a European country during the worst of it, in front of the priests. And then they would grab your head and they would go through your head looking for anything. If you had a mole, witch's mark. And as you had mentioned, before we started, one of the things that they believed that mark did was provide what they used to call a teat, a breast, for the familiar to drink from. I know, you cannot make this up. You can't make this up.
Blood come out? Well, I mean, was it blood?
Yeah, well, it was supposed to be if they could stab you in your witch's mark and you did not bleed, then it was of the devil. It was your mark. Here's what they would do. They would have what they would call a witch inquisitor. And there was, by the way, a grand witch inquisitor, but let's go with the witch inquisitor. So he would have this little fake knife, and it would look like a knife, but when it hit, it retracts. And so you didn't bleed, of course, because there's no knife, there's no blade. And so it would retract in. They couldn't see it, the people, standing next. And so he would take it out, and of course the knife blade would come back out, and people would just be amazed that this terrible witch had lived amongst them. So that's the kind of things that they would do. And then, of course, they would put you to the test, what they call the test. And so they would put you on what looked like a seesaw, and they would stand or have bags on one end. They would have you on the other. And then they would start dunking you into the river. And the idea, of course, they wanted you to admit, so it's kind of like waterboarding on a grander scale. Yeah. And they would want you to confess. And if you confess, and there were men who were also, by the way, accused of witchcraft and put to the test, and all of the 9 yards of this sort of inquisition. But if you would say, I am a witch, number one, the inquisitor gets paid. Number two, the people who had accused you of witchcraft are now held in great regard by the community. So there's a lot of peer pressure with this. And number three, we also have the religious community that's saying, "We told you so. There's evil out there. The only people that can protect you from this is us." Right? Setting themselves up to be elevated, if you will. Look to us for your salvation. Look to us, and for protection. And don't get me wrong, I'm an old granny woman. I have great respect for religious institutions, but this is a fact, and facts are facts.
You can't forget the history. That's
Yeah.
important.
Yes, absolutely. And so, there was often a situation where you would have someone who would die during the test, and they would drown. And their whole attitude was like the great general who said, "Let God sort them out."
That it was a witch hunter and they were getting paid. And that's such a criminal thing when you think about it, with atrocities occurred because of like this made up, witch's hammer and accusing people and yeah, the money racket apparently going on. And that's really the evil part. And so once you look into that history, it makes, more sense how it happened and everything. So that's just terrible. But one thing I wanted to mention too is the dogs you mentioned, they were both black dogs, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, it wasn't in the description I had read, but I would not be surprised because black, especially cats, has always been equated with evil. And I actually had a graduate level communication class, and this freaked me out, where the professor said that animals do not have true forms of communication. And I'm like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. And I've got to tell you, there's a couple of things I want to tell you. In 2015, there was a man in China who drove home one night, and there was a dog laying in his parking space. So he got out. Instead of shooing it off, he kicked the dog. So he parks. That evening, a whole pack of dogs came and destroyed his car. They ripped his windshield wipers off. He came out the next morning. There were, everywhere they could bite and leave a bite in softer metal. There were these dents all over his car, and the neighbor was there to see it and had told him, yes, and the reason that they knew it was about this one dog is because the dog had distinct markings, and the neighbor saw everything, and the dog was with them. It's like he went and told the pack, and they got their revenge. And then there's a really interesting story about an elephant, and he was a bull elephant, beloved by his, elephant herd. And the whole herd. Let me tell you something. So this elephant was shot and killed, and of course his tusks were taken by a poacher. Well, the elephants started rebelling, and it wasn't just one herd, but another herd that was nearby. And they gathered together, and they waited until nighttime, and they did a series of nighttime raids of the village, and they destroyed like 54 homes before it was over with. I know people remember. I mean, and so do animals. It's that simple. And then just one more thing. This I love. Charles II of England, okay, was a very superstitious man, and he hated crows. And the way that they use this is interchangeably, by the way. I didn't have time to see if it was actual crows or ravens, but they use both terms. They are two different birds. But he was told, because he told him, he said, eradicate all the crows. Get them out of the tower. Get them out. I want them all out. And so a soothsayer, or someone who was respected as having some knowledge of the arcane, told him that if all of the crows ever left the tower, that the monarchy would fall and England would fall. And so from that day forward, they actually have what they call a raven master that works in the tower. And his job is to make sure that six or more, because that was the number that King Charles II was given, was six or more crows must be kept in the tower or ill fate. And they still have that position to this day. It's fascinating when you start looking at animals as sentient beings with the capacity of retaliation and vengeance. And there's and let me tell you, big cats are one of them. There was a situation in India where this poacher went out and he killed a mama and her cub, and Daddy must have seen it. And so he stalked that area for months. And that same poacher came back with a group. He ignored the group. He had seen who had killed his mama and his wife, if you will, his lioness, and his cub. And that's the one he got. He mauled him just enough to make him,
Yeah.
helpless, and drug him off into the forest because he wanted to get away from the other men, right? So yeah, big cats are known for
Yeah.
having long memories. So are elephants. So are crows and ravens. Keep that in mind.
Well, as animals are evolving, they have, I guess, cell memory where they keep, like if you open a, they say if you open a can opener, that a new kitten knows what that means, like even if they didn't even, you know what I mean? Like it's in their DNA somehow. They're evolving to already know these things. But yeah, like cats and dogs have magical powers. I feel like, they can help us. They have, sorry. Yeah, they have their own special powers. Like, cats, they'll can sit on you and purr, and they can help lower your blood pressure, and they say the frequency of purring can help mend your bones, and that they think that, or scientists think that's why cats purr, is so, to heal themselves. And as you were talking about, the cats will kill the rodents and that will keep us safe. And they say that cats domesticated themselves to live with humans and be our companions. And, dogs obviously from wolves. And, we can train dogs to help us medically, sniff out cancer, which is such a crazy thing if you think about it. And they could like sense when people maybe are having like, yeah, different medical issues, like maybe if they're going to have a seizure, and the dog can help assist them, or, be an aid to blind people and things like that. And, they say that cats and dogs can see spirits and are more connected to the spirit world. And a dog might start barking and you don't see anything there. They have different senses, I feel, than we do. Maybe their eyes are different as well, and maybe they are able to see that and perceive in ways that we can't. So I think that, cats have definitely been, yeah, like we said, so closely associated with witches and witchcraft, and that's one of the reasons, because they're connected to the spirit world. And so we have, like I said, cats and dogs, and then we have owls, as night creatures, like, and bats too, and also hares, rabbits, because they dig underground, so they are like closer to the spirit world, if it's below our feet, if you're thinking about it that way. And bats going into caves, so that's kind of like going in to, yeah, to Earth's inner mysteries. What
Well,
else?
cats have been beloved and they have been, well, just not loved. There's an old Irish saying, and usually the man of the house would say it when he would visit another house, and he would leave and he'd say, "Bless everyone in the house except the cat." And you were talking about black cats. For those who want to adopt a cat, I always recommend a black cat because they have the least, not ability, but they have the least luck, if you will, in finding a home. There are more black cats that are euthanized than I
Yeah,
care to think about. It's
that
like
that's so
72.5%.
crazy, though. That's so
Yes.
crazy though that people are still superstitious in negative ways like that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when there's no reason to be at all. It's terrible. But I was gonna say something. Sorry, I'm losing my track of thought and stuff. Uh, oh, and another reason to have a black cat is if you're like us and you wear black all the time, you're not going to get any hair on your clothes that you can see anyway. So that's another good tip.
That's a great, that's a great idea. Just having the black black because I
Yeah.
can tell you I've got two dogs and they have lighter markings and darker markings, but oh my gosh, you can see those hairs everywhere. Um, I got to tell you too, let's talk a little bit about using certain animals. And we talk, you mentioned owls. Owls in certain cultures they are feared and they are not something you want to be associated with because they see them as representing death. And there's even in Appalachian culture, there's an old saying that if you encounter an owl during the day, that death is going to follow soon. And so there's that
Yeah.
whole connection. I've always looked at it as, the owl is simply a creature that can move between the two worlds and is comfortable doing that and being a medium. That's how I feel about myself. So, I've always liked owl energy. That is
Me
my
too.
energy animal is the
Yeah.
owl.
Yeah, I love owls too, especially the screech owl. And you know what? And also, you had asked me one time what was my, power animal, and I said a skunk. And I have a few different reasons for that, but I like to have a streak in my hair that's representative of the skunk's tail. But we were talking about owls, and my favorite one is the screech owl. I just love hearing them at night. And I always, when I was younger, I didn't know what that was. Sound like a little horse, like and like I was like I said it's a fairy's horse is what I like to think it was, but when I found out what it was, I'm like, "Oh, they're so cute because 'cause they're small, screech owls." But you're gonna love this. Listen to this, what I read today about owls. The Latin word strix and its derivative strega literally mean screech owl, but they're also synonyms for witch. Semitic spirit Lilith's name has become synonymous with witch, but what it really means is screech owl too. Owls served as witches, messengers, and familiars in ancient Egypt and Rome, as well as throughout Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Yeah, I think that was the main thing. But yeah, I thought that was cool about that. It just means witch and screech owl. I'm like, yeah. And Athena that's who is her thing is owls and wisdom because she's goddess of wisdom, and also they made her later on be like the goddess of war, didn't they? Yeah. But Screech Owl's her main owl, and she could transform into an owl.
What I was going to say is, since we're leaving this, and we need to talk about how to work with certain animals because whatever the animal represents is what you can, do your magical works with. And that is like, independence, protection, ability to go into the darker regions of ourselves and shadow work, connecting with the other side, all of these things for cats. And dogs have some of those. Although I don't personally see dogs, even though I know they're connected with Hecate, I don't see them as being particularly connected with the other side, and yet they are. It's just not been my experience. It's always been with cats. But I will tell you, I had a cat or a dog, a little dog that passed, and her name was Piper. She was a little skipperkie, so a little black dog, just as black as night. And I heard her after she passed, she would always bark at the door. And I heard her 3 or 4 times in the next 2 or 3 weeks barking to be let out. And eventually I think she crossed the Rainbow Bridge and I haven't heard from her since.
Animal sacrifice is obviously a terrible thing that, we would never consider as animal lovers because there's no reason to do that. There's many ways to achieve the same end in which, magic and stuff, there's no really any need for any kind of bloodshed or sacrifice.
So Romans had, it was on August 3rd, it was determined that they had a event, a festival, and part of the festival would be to hang or crucify dogs. and I believe it was dogs. I'll have to go back. If not, I'll put the correction here, and you'll know. But I believe they crucified dogs on that day, and it was said that because they did it, one of the reasons was because in 390 BC the dogs did not warn them about an invasion from the barbarians, and so they got their what's kicked all over their own city, and so they blamed the dogs for that, and so they had not forgotten it, and that's one of the reasons I read that they actually did this. But I'm going to let you wrap it up because we are at 28 minutes. So, and we will be continuing the subject right in our next Witchy Wisdom. So, Zeea, wrap it up for us.
All right, thank y'all for watching. We'll talk more about animals and how they accompany us on our magical journey. We're still got to talk about shapeshifters. That's a really interesting and complex, awesome subject. And I want you guys to tell us in the comments what's your familiar's name, because I know these days us witches associate, the word familiar, which kind of with just our pets. Or, they sometimes might help us with our magical workings, but yeah, what's your pet's name? We want to know what kind of pet do you have as well. But yeah, stay tuned for part 2. Follow us, and we're on YouTube. Yeah, subscribe. That's what I want to say. Like and subscribe.
And until next time,
Stay
stay
curious.
curious.